Hello and welcome back to Continental Club, where we discuss the hottest topics in European football. Joining me today, we've got Patrick van Straten and Michael McCubbin. We've got a fantastic episode for you guys lined up for you today. We are talking managerial changes because at Scout Reports asked what potential managerial changes excite you the most this summer. But before we get into the managerial merry-go-round, which may or may not happen, just a quick reminder to subscribe to EuroFootball Daily and hit that notification bell to never miss a Continental Club. But there's basically quite a few unknown factors at play here. Basically, we don't know how the player transfer market's going to be, and we certainly don't know how the managerial market's going to be. No one knows, what sort of state football's finances will be in to sign players or remove current managers. So this is all a bit up in the air. But it's a worthwhile discussion anyway, McCubs, because one manager in Mauricio Pochettino has been linked quite heavily with the Newcastle job. What do you think are his chances of getting back into management this summer?
Well, you suspect they'd be quite high, but it's a weird one. 6 months ago, you would have said, yeah, he'll get the job. He'll easily get back into management, and he'll probably get whatever job he wants. Whereas now, I think the kind of the choice that's out there is a bit smaller, I think. Even the fact that he's been linked with this Newcastle job. Okay, Newcastle, are expected to be flush with cash and have owners that you'd expect are very keen to turn the club into a far more long-term footballing project, and one that has the kind of ambitions that a manager like Pochettino has himself. But you'd expect by this point that he would have already been tapped up by Man United or Bayern Munich. Especially Bayern seemed to be kind of one of the real kind of obvious choices when he was originally tapped by Spurs, because they were in a bit of a state themselves, weren't they? With Kovac just about to lose his job at the time. But obviously Bayern have now given Hansi Flick, or I don't know if they've actually handed him the contract. I think they have, haven't they? So he's there long term now. He's doing a really good job there, at least for now. Man United, after that kind of bump that they've had in the last couple of months, seem to be fairly happy with Solskjaer, or at least don't look like they would be in a rush to get rid of him. And obviously, this whole situation has meant that there's no big club that is suddenly coming off a really bad run of form or anything that could inspire like a knee-jerk reaction from any club hierarchy. So it's it's a difficult one. I just can't see him going to Newcastle. I just really can't see it happening. I think they could do a good job in trying to persuade him, I'm sure, and I'm sure he will be targeted by them. But I feel like for a manager of Poch's stature now, I just don't see him going to another club where he's going to have to do all that work. Like at Spurs, I feel like he really earned his place in the top bracket of managers, because he took a club which were, a Champions League qualification club at best, and made them one of the best clubs in England. I think now he's got to have his sights set on a club which is going to be challenging for titles consistently already, and just need that extra bit of kind of star quality in terms of his kind of tactical know-how and his ability in improving players. So I just can't see him taking that step to Newcastle. I just think that would just be a step down, not even a step sideways for him. Especially when we don't really know what this Newcastle project is going to look like. I feel like with a lot of takeovers, there might be a kind of 2-year period where it all feels a bit experimental at St James's Park, and then finally there's a little bit of clarity, and they may well get through one or two managers before picking the best one. I just don't think the timing's right for that. So with Poch, it's hard to see where he goes next. PSG obviously were a shout as well, but they're doing all right at the moment. Unless Tuchel decides to leave, I can't see him being sacked. It's a bit of a difficult one. I think, and we're going to get onto another couple of managers, especially Allegri, who we're going to talk about as well. But I can't remember a time when when say 2 or 3 of the top managers in the world, kind of top 6, 7 managers in the world, are all out of work for so long. I mean, Allegri's been out of a job since last summer. Poch's been out of a job since last November, and obviously this situation has probably contributed to the fact that they've not been they're not being kind of strongly linked with any club right now. But yeah, it feels like a quite unique situation with so many top managers and no obvious place for them to go right now.
For sure. No, I'm totally with you, and I'm totally with you on Pochettino to Newcastle. For me, it would be a really unambitious move from a manager who's on the cusp of doing something really special at Spurs. The only thing against his name from, what people would say is that those lack of trophies. So go to a club where you're in with a shout of getting one consistently, and he will be in the conversation for any job with a European elite club over the next 18 months. Don't join Newcastle as, cash flush as they are, when you don't know what the owners are like, you don't know what the sort of the long-term project's going to particularly look like, and you don't know how easy it will be to attract the players you need to even get them anywhere close to the top 4. I couldn't agree more on that. One idea that came into my head for where Poch could go was Dortmund. I feel like Favre, they had a bit of a pickup after the winter break, but they were 4th at the winter break. Then I think they won 7 of their 8 games, so they're now in 2nd in the Bundesliga. But they surrendered that 2-1 lead against PSG in the Champions League. They obviously lost in I think it was the last 16 of the Pokal. A lot of young talent there, which I'm sure he'd love to get his hands on as well. Obviously, the likes of Sancho, who might leave this summer, but Reyna, Haaland, Akanji, Dahoud, Zagadou, etc. The names go on and on. So Dortmund could be a good option for him. Maybe Atleti if Simeone moves on as well, although you feel like with Simeone and Atleti, he'll get to make that decision himself, and probably rightly so. So we'll see about Pochettino. But Pat, let's move on to another man who McCubb's mentioned in Max Allegri, because this sabbatical, as McCubbin says, maybe has put him down the pecking order slightly for these big jobs. What would you say to that?
Yeah, probably a little bit. I mean, Pochettino's availability alone pushes Allegri down the shopping list of major clubs. But I also think that he naturally has the disadvantage of being perceived as a defensive coach. And to be honest, he is a defensive coach. Like, Juventus scored a lot of goals while he was there, but often that was because they were overperforming expected goals. And I think that was largely because they had some great finishers in the side, like Dybala, who generally overperforms. And really their success was built on their defence. I think his worst defensive season was his last one at Juve, and they conceded 30 league goals. His best defensive season, they conceded 20, and all the rest were in between, obviously. So, I mean, that was really what powered them to the top of the table. They were often outscored by Spalletti's Roma, by Sarri's Napoli. And I think that now there are fewer and fewer clubs who are willing to accept a slightly more passive style of play, even if it is successful. Chelsea have obviously decided that they're going to try and create a new style and give Lampard time to institute it. But aside from the Italian teams, it's quite hard to see who else would be interested. Atletico Madrid are pretty much committed to Simeone until he decides to leave. PSG, of course, are always the possibility. Like, if football comes back and PSG got knocked out really quickly of the Champions League, then you could see them going and getting Allegri because he got to 2 finals with a pretty ramshackle Juve side. I mean, he got to a Champions League final with Evra having arrived on a free, playing left wing back for them. Like, that is pretty impressive stuff. But other than that, it's quite hard to find a home for him. And to be honest with you, I kind of feel that he'll end up at Spurs. I just do. Obviously, there were the rumours about him taking English lessons. But fundamentally, the obvious places for him are PSG, another Italian club, which I don't think he'll take, and then Man United and Spurs. Now, Man United are going to persist with Solskjaer for a little bit longer, which I would probably go and get Pochettino if I could. But on the other hand, you could argue that if Solskjaer finishes the season fairly strongly, it's not like he deserves to be sacked particularly. I think he's done a pretty decent job there this season, a slightly underrated job. But when they eventually get rid of him, which they will, you imagine that if Pochettino's available, they'll go for him. And so then the only question is, does Pochettino get snapped up by somebody else before Allegri does? And I don't know. I think the future of those two managers is so closely linked. And so fundamentally, I just think Solskjaer will go from Man United at some point. They will hire Pochettino. Mourinho, I think, will get run out of Spurs before too long, but probably in the next 18 months to be sure. And I think that then Allegri will go there. Because now it's just, as good a manager as he is, it feels like a slightly conservative, slightly boring appointment, even though he's a really, really good coach. And I think that it's quite hard to sell that to your fans if your fans expect to play on the front foot. Spurs, I think, at the moment would probably be willing to accept an upgrade on Mourinho when Mourinho eventually leaves, who isn't going to alienate all their players, which essentially is what Allegri is.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting. I don't know whether Allegri can afford to wait another 18 months, because then he would have been out of the game like 2.5 years. And whether Spurs would also take the decision to sack Mourinho in a hurry, having, paid that massive payout to Pochettino. I think it was like 15-16 million, if my memory serves me right. So again, Allegri, it's not really clear, or Pochettino, but it's difficult to make these suggestions without the season in play. Maybe the narratives by now, had we had an extra 4 or 5 games of the season, had the Champions League progressed a bit further, I think these things might have become more clear. But in terms of another manager out of work at the moment is Marcelino. Obviously, had a bit of a weird start to his managerial career. Was at middling La Liga clubs until 2012, and then got the job with Sevilla. Then got fired. Sorry, that was in 2011. Got fired quite soon after. Then went to Villarreal, who at the time weren't a big proposition whatsoever. They're actually in the Segunda division. He got hired in January time and took them up. I think he only lost 2 of the 20 or so games. And then from there at Villarreal, his work was incredible. I think it was 3 top 6 finishes in the next 3 years, including a 4th spot in 15-16 and a run to the Europa League semi-finals that year as well, where they lost to Liverpool, who then went and lost to Sevilla in the final, if memory serves me right. And he was known for, really shrewd signings during that time as well. Brought in Eric Bailly from Espanyol, Luciano Vieto from Racing Club, Sergio Asenjo from Atletico Madrid, Samu Castillejo, etc. There was a lot of players that turned out to be very solid for Villarreal and then made a profit when they then moved on, like Castillejo when he got sold to AC Milan. But before the 16-17 season, just days before, he had a falling out because the ownership structure there wanted to take the captaincy from Musacchio. So he then went to Valencia, and Valencia had been a bit of a mess under Peter Lim for quite a while. That was just after the Gary Neville times, etc. And they'd finished 12th the year before. He finished in back-to-back 4th places, won a Copa del Rey in 17-18, or 18-19 actually, possibly. And then was fired at the start of this year, with the club having won one of their opening 3 games. So it felt a bit rushed, and I was actually trying to do some reading on why he was fired, because it didn't seem to make much sense at the time. But it was supposedly because Peter Lim doesn't give any credit for cup competitions, doesn't want to run in the Europa League, doesn't want to run in the Copa del Rey, and Marcelino and his coaching staff really wanted to go for the Copa del Rey last season. Thought it was achievable, the players wanted to do it. Peter Lim, when he went to Singapore to have his end of year chat with him, only wanted to congratulate him on the fact that he'd finished 4th, didn't give any respect for the Copa del Rey win whatsoever. This was according to an article AS wrote with an interview from Marcelino, so quite a good source. So Marcelino could be an option for a lot of clubs. I don't think he's ready for a cream of the crop Champions League club, but he's been linked quite heavily with AC Milan, who seem to be having some issues getting Ralf Rangnick through the door. And whilst Pioli has steadied the ship after a pretty awful start under Paulo, it feels like he's going to be replaced at the end of this year. And if they can't get Ralf Rangnick, then Marcelino could be an option. Pat, I know you've been quite a fan of Marcelino for quite a while, and we're even touting him for the Arsenal job. Obviously, that probably won't happen now, but what are his best credentials? What are his best things about him?
He builds a really, really solid defence. everywhere he's gone, regardless of the talent he's had, he's built a solid defence. And even players, like you say, he's been able to sell players at a profit largely because they've succeeded in his defence. So Musacchio went on at a profit, Gabriel went to Arsenal at a profit, Bailly went on at a profit. And this was because they'd all really excelled in a pretty conventional 4-4-2. On the other hand, it looked at Valencia like he'd added some quality attack to his coaching. I mean, he was helped by Gonzalo Guedes, who had an amazing season in that season on loan from PSG at Valencia. But it was really only finishing that let them down that season, because I think expected points had them like second in the league. And I think that really, if you want a guy who's going to come in and either whip your defense into shape or keep it in shape, and then also make the rest of your team functional, then he works quite well. I mean, like if you're Newcastle and you want a more ambitious upgrade on Steve Bruce, then Marcelino is a really, really good guy to go for, because he's probably about the right level for you, and he's proven in the Europa League. I think he'd actually probably be fine in the Champions League as well, and he's a difficult manager. Like, he's just a difficult guy to out-tactic. So I definitely go for him, assuming that people like Ralf Rangnick aren't available. By the way, let's be clear, it's Ralf Rangnick, not Ralf Ragnick. Hamill does this as well. He leaves out this N in Ralf Rangnick's name, and it makes me furious.
Always butcher pronunciations. Ralf Rangnick.
Also pronunciation, not pronunciation.
Well, there we go. Thank you, Pat.
Jesus Christ, Dukes. You cut your hair and all your powers have disappeared. Yeah, I think that Marcelino's actually kind of easier to find a home for than a lot of these other guys, right? Because he's not at the absolute top end of the market. There are loads of teams that are kind of around the Champions League, around the Europa League, like really in that kind of, 4th to 8th spot in the top 5 leagues. And I think he could go to any of those. I think he'd be good for a Lyon. I think he'd be good for a host of German clubs, to be honest. I think he'd have been better than Wagner for Schalke. But then there's the question of language barrier, which also is the same thing as with Pochettino for Dortmund. I completely agree that Pochettino to Dortmund makes sense in footballing terms, but you think how long it took him to get to the point where he was happy speaking English in the Premier League, and I imagine that Dortmund would be a little bit wary of recruiting somebody where they might have that language barrier up front.
Yeah, for sure. Although supposedly he was only so keen on using that translator for so long because he was his good mate. But I don't know how much truth there is in that. McCubs, yeah. I'm going to throw some names at you for other managers who are available, who I didn't want to include in depth because, frankly, they're not that impressive necessarily. But let me know if any of these take your pick for anyone. So we've got Ernesto Valverde, Nico Kovac, Unai Emery, Spalletti, Marco Silva, Leo Jardim, Pellegrini, Montella and Di Francesco. Out of those names, I realised that was quite a lot of names in a short space of time. Did anyone sort of take your fancy for a good option for any club in particular? Or
I mean, Leo Jardim, I feel like he could just do with a new project. I think the kind of way that his time at Monaco ended, especially coming back after Henry left, and it didn't end well for him before that either. I feel like he needs a project, and I don't know. He's obviously got the credentials. He's good with young players. He's very good at organising a squad. He's obviously very good at improving players and tactically pretty sound. So I think I'm trying to think of an actual job for him to go to. I mean, maybe a Dortmund style job as well. That would probably make sense for him in some ways, or maybe even another like German club like Hoffenheim maybe. I mean, he was obviously being touted for the United job about a year ago, but again, it just doesn't seem. I just don't feel like United would go for him if they were going to replace Solskjaer with anyone. So yeah, I think Jardim is probably out of those managers feels like the one that kind of deserves a chance at an ambitious club.
Yeah, I go with that as well. I'd like to see Manuel Pellegrini back in work as well, just because I feel like he's got sort of unfinished business as a manager. I've always really liked the way he deals with the media and his players. He's always very well liked wherever he's been. So Manuel Pellegrini. But yeah, guys, that's our suggestions on, well, we didn't really suggest that much because it was quite difficult, but those are the managers that are out of work. Let us know where you want to see them in the comments down below, and we'll see what happens at the end of the year. Maybe Pochettino will be at United, maybe Allegri will be at Bayern. We'll wait and see, but let's move on to quickfire questions. Our quickfire question this week comes in from @Milos Vasilevi 7, sorry if I butchered your name there, Milos, who asked, greatest World Cup and Champions League final. Pat, you've got a couple of years on me and my Cubs, just. What's your greatest World Cup and Champions League final memories?
Okay, well, I remember 6 World Cup finals. The first one I remember was 1998. I only saw the first 60 minutes of that, and then I had to go to bed because I was very young. But that was pretty great. Though I was kind of... At the time, I was a bit sad. Looking back on it, I think I would have supported France. But at the time, I was sad because I loved Ronaldo so much. The real Ronaldo, not the other one. But the last World Cup final was pretty amazing, to be honest with you. It genuinely was ridiculous. The goals in it were ridiculous. A goal as well when the keeper boots the ball against a striker is always amazing. It had the right blend of embarrassing things happening and quality. But it also felt weirdly... I don't know. There was something kind of muted about it. There was something where I just kind of felt like I couldn't take it that seriously because so many dumb things were happening. So maybe there's a part of that there. But often World Cup finals are terrible. Champions League finals. The Real Madrid beating Juve 4-1 a couple of years ago was pretty special. The Mandzukic goal. I suppose I feel like I know what McCubbin's going to say. And, you're not wrong. Though, actually, sorry. Please go and say yours.
Yeah, I feel like there's a riddle here. Oh, God. I'm just trying to second guess what you think I'm thinking now.
Are you not going to say 99?
99 was amazing. But, I was, 5. And I wasn't really... That was actually the night that I... obviously being a glory hunter, it's probably no surprise. That was the night that I started supporting them because I was watching him. I was 5. I wasn't really taking much notice, but my dad was watching it. And he's not a football fan, but he was watching it and he was supporting United because they were the English team and then they won. So I was like, I'll pick them as my team then. So yeah, in that sense, that was good. But I don't really remember anything from the night. I remember seeing them winning and my dad being like, oh, how great is that? But I don't actually remember how dramatic it was or anything. I just remember kind of half watching it and being like, oh, that's cool. So yeah, that final and that. But then when I've watched it back, it wasn't actually that good a game, and it
was so boring until the last few minutes.
It was it was a game that Bayern easily could have won. So I think in terms of I feel like the 2000s were pretty good. I think the Chelsea United final was pretty amazing actually. Obviously, it went down to penalties in the end, but and obviously I had a kind of a vested interest in it, obviously. But I think that game was pretty dramatic, especially the extra time. There were so many good chances for both sides, and obviously drama in Drogba getting sent off and Terry snorting on Tevez and all that. Hard to look past Liverpool AC Milan as well. Obviously, that was a ridiculous game. It was, from what I remember, it was actually pretty entertaining seeing Liverpool come back into it and then just hang on for dear life for an hour before that penalty shootout. Even when they made that comeback, it still looked like AC Milan were probably going to win it. So yeah, those two stick in my mind. I think in recent years, it's a tough one. Last year's I think was easily the worst I've watched. The Tottenham Liverpool game was awful. So yeah, I think Liverpool, AC Milan, United, Chelsea, and then I think those two probably stick in my mind the most.
Fair. I thought in terms of World Cup finals, I thought the 2010 one and 2014 were pretty dreadful. I agree with Pat. 2018 was really fun. 2006 was a lot of drama. That's the first World Cup final I can really properly remember. And just with, everything that came with it. The goals were really high standard. The sending off, obviously. The imagery of that final was Zidane walking past the trophy. That will stick with me for a long time. In terms of the Champions League finals, best display by a distance has to be Barcelona at Wembley in 2011. Absolutely taking apart a great Man United side, which were probably just on the on the curve of their peak. But still, what a performance from Barcelona. And as we mentioned just off camera before we started answering this, the goals in that game were really high quality as well. Even like Rooney's strike, sort of gets forgotten. Just a number of great goals he scored in that period. 2012 with Chelsea had a lot of drama as well. That was a really unlikely Champions League final win, whatever you want to call it. That was a true sort of underdog story. And they were completely outclassed in that final. I don't really know still how they managed to win. That'd probably be my pick for best World Cup and Champions League finals. But guys, get your suggestions in the comments down below even. We want to know your best memories from those big games, which often do disappoint, but we have had some classics at the same time. And that's all we've got time for on Continental Club for this week. Thank you very much for watching once again. Pat, what should the good people even go and do now?
Go and check out Extra Time, which had you on it this week, Dukes, where we talked about players who might be available cheaply this summer, expiring contracts, and basically how teams can build themselves a Champions League ready side on a shoestring given the current state of the market.
Nice. McCubs, anything you'd like to push to?
Everything you need to know over on Football Daily. This week, I believe it's about Roman Abramovich and how he changed football forever when he bought Chelsea. So yeah, go and check that one out.
Love it. Lots of great content across both our channels. We'll see you next week. Thanks very much, guys. Bye.
Bye.